welcome to the Crazy2Calm Service Dog Handler Chats. Tonight we're doing a chat I'm very excited about. We have a special guest, Ariel Faber, coming back to talk to us a little bit about more on the theory of slow is fast. Of course, I have somebody coming to my front door. So, Ariel, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Ariel, and I run Fired Up Dog Training. In addition to running the Positive Plus Our Service Dog group on Facebook, Penny invited me as a service dog trainer to come talk about. We did talk about if you have a service dog candidate as a puppy last time. Today it's going to be about adolescents, but it's not just relevant to a service dog in training. It is relevant to any dog. We may have points that are specific to a service dog in training, but it's really important that we are meeting the needs of these dogs that we would like to go on to become service dogs. Frequently, we all see on social media where people are really rushing these dogs through training, and it can damage the relationship between the dog and the handler. It can also cause burnout because the dogs are just expected to be performing at this high level at far too young of an age. So when we say slow is fast, we mean that if you take the time to work with your dog during these life stages where they're going to need more support, it can actually benefit you in the long run. Slow is fast is preventing burnout in dogs that we hope to become service dogs. And it can also make sure that the relationship between the dog and the handler is strong and that they can rely on each other versus putting so much pressure on a really young dog. And it doesn't have to be a service dog either. This could be a sport prospect. This could be a therapy dog prospect. Really anything. We want to make sure we're taking our time and giving these dogs the time they need to grow up and mature instead of throwing them into these sports or these jobs where there's a lot expected of them.
I totally see that quite a bit. And it's that catch of, we know that adolescent brain is constantly changing through adolescence. And so they might be able to handle that sport this week, but then they can't do it next week. And then when we expect them to be able to do the same thing this week they did last week, we get into trouble and overcommit them very, very fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that a lot in service dog groups on Facebook where people are saying that their 7 or 8 month old dog is a fully trained service dog. And I'm just looking at it and going, I understand that your dog may currently meet the criteria of our federal laws, which in the US is the Americans with Disabilities Act, to be a service dog, but is your dog mature enough for you to rely on your dog to assist you in all of these different situations? I mean, public access training takes, oh gracious, months and months. I don't see how your 7 or 8 month old puppy can be called a fully trained service dog. There's just so much training that has to be done. And even if you were to start training in public at a really young age, which I really don't recommend, but that's a different topic altogether, how can you be sure that with the development going on in your dog's brain, that your dog is reliable and focused during this time in their life when their brain is usually anything but reliable or focused?
I had that problem, and I know you touched on it in the puppy Zoom, where some states don't cover service dogs in training. And so in order to continue training Azul at a young age, he was labeled as a service dog. But to me, that meant working the dog in front of you, and that meant I didn't go into places he couldn't handle at that particular time. Or I left him home, took another human or something. So while you can work on the training, you definitely have to pair it to your dogs. There's no way I could have, like, say, Cindy and I always talk about going to Disney because she lives super close, where that might just be a weekend occasion. And for me, that's a like once in a lifetime kind of opportunity. I wouldn't do that to my 7-month old. They're not ready for that. But for him at 7 months old to be able to go in and sit down at a doctor's office that I knew was going to be a 15-minute appointment, a regular kind of just check-in, then he could handle that. Would I have taken him for something big like x-rays? No, he was almost 18 months before he did anything like that. So it's a matter of, to me, I don't care what label you put on your dog or don't put on your dog. It's working the dog in front of you is the most important thing, no matter what your sticker says or your patch says. So that's the important part. That's the mistake I see people making in adolescence, is expecting their dog to be able to handle everything. I know
Yeah,
that's a big one for you too.
yeah, and it's kind of I'm sorry, Cindy.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and that's a big problem because one week they may know how to sit perfectly square in heel position, and the next week what's a sit? And not know how to even put their butt on the ground.
Yeah. And I completely agree with that. And when I said, they're saying their dog is a fully trained service dog, I didn't refer to labeling on the vest. I do know that can be an issue, but it's when you're declaring to everyone else, oh, my dog is fully trained, but you haven't given them the time to mature enough to be reliably fully trained. I don't really see that as, what's the word I'm looking for? Helpful for you or your dog. Now, if you have to do that because your dog meets the ADA criteria and that's the only choice you have for access to anything, that I can understand. But when you hold them to this expectation that a 3-year-old dog could be held to, and your dog is 8 months old, that's where it starts to get a little hairy for me. And that's what I'm seeing a lot on social media with these adolescent dogs who are going through so many changes and so fast. And they're being held to impossible standards and their needs aren't being met. And that can create a very high burnout rate. It can also create a lot of frustration on the handler. They might think their dog is fully trained, and so they're relying on this dog to do seizure alerts and then all of these response tasks after they have a seizure, and their dog doesn't respond because the dog is so young. They're still getting used to this, so it can be damaging for both ends of the leash.
I totally agree with that. And I mean, that's kind of one of the huge things. Well, Azul could do migraine alerts at 6 months. We weren't training them, and I would reinforce it if he did it, but I sure wasn't expecting them, because I didn't actually start doing scent training until he was closer to 9 months. And the only reason I did it at that age was because he was hitting them all the time, consistently, regularly. I'm like, well, if you're going to do it, let's at least work on getting you to be doing it correctly. The right alert behavior, and pairing the behavior I wanted versus random behavior and just trying everything. So a lot of adolescents, and that's what makes it so hard for owner trainers, is that it has to be so individualized per dog. Every single dog is different. Like you were saying with your golden, didn't start hitting the adolescent stages until they were older. Azul actually started hitting adolescent stages right around 6.5, 7 months old. But then he had a nice long kind of break in the middle where he didn't have any major things happening for a while. And then again, he hit it. So it kind of just depends. Every dog is a little bit different. And so we did kind of talk about, so we know the problems with adolescents. So what can we give to people? What should they start with if they're struggling with adolescence?
Yeah, so last week we did what do puppies need? So this week it's going to be what do adolescent dogs need? Um, we hear a lot about, oh, well, adolescent brain, your dog is a teenager, your dog's brain is developing, your dog's being stubborn. But what is the truth and what do they need? How can we help them, whether it's a service dog in training, whether it's a sport prospect, if it's a therapy dog in training, if it's a pet dog, any number of things. What do these dogs need from us to help them through this life stage? Because it is hard, just like with a human going through their teenage phase, where all of those hormones are going on and their impulse control starts dialing back. So that's harder for them. What do they need from us, adolescent dogs? So the very first thing that I think everybody should know about an adolescent dog is you are going to go back to basics. Your dog may have been a superstar at 12 different things last week. And this week, he doesn't know a word you've said. So you may be going back to step one of teaching anything or everything to help your dog. So maybe your dog, when you say sit, looks at you like, are you speaking Greek? Unless you're speaking Greek, in which case your dog might be looking at you going, are you speaking Chinese or whatever language you don't speak? Don't be afraid to go back to step one. So go back to step one. Go back to the lure or shaping or however you taught the behavior. Your dog should learn it faster when we generalize a behavior. And so we teach the behavior, say, in your home. And then we go out into your front yard and we start from the beginning and we teach the behavior again. So I'm going to say sit just as a place marker here. So we teach sit in the house. Then we teach sit out in the yard. Then we go somewhere, say a pet store. We teach sit in the pet store. And then we go to the tractor supply store or whatever farming supply store you have that's pet friendly. And you teach sit there. And then you go to a Bass Pro Shop and you teach sit there. But every time you teach sit, your dog has probably picked up on it faster than that first time you were teaching it. That is probably what is going to happen with your adolescent dog. You're going to go back to step one, and then he's going to go, oh, yeah, I know how to do that. Great. So now you're going to build your reinforcement history. Okay. Spending time building your reinforcement history during the adolescent phase, those foundation skills, those life skills that every dog should have, spending time on that over teaching a bunch of new skills is so valuable to an adolescent dog. If you're trying to teach them new things, but that adolescent brain has forgotten the basic things, you're going to wind up with neither one. So it's far better to spend time going back to the basics, going back to engagement, going back to impulse control, settling, leash walking, any of those kinds of skills. Spend time on those, especially that impulse control, because let me tell you, during the adolescent phase, it is out the window. They need a lot of help. They are not doing it to spite you. They are not doing it to be stubborn. Dogs don't have the capability to think like that. They are just doing what their nature tells them to do. So don't think of it as them being stubborn. Just say, okay, my dog is struggling. Instead of saying my dog is being stubborn about, I want you to replace that with my dog is struggling to or struggling with, and fill in the blank. If it's impulse control, my dog is struggling with impulse control. Or maybe it's engagement. My dog is struggling to engage. And see how that transforms how you work with your dog. A lot of times I see adolescents, this is when they start pulling out the aversive collars because the dog spent time knowing how to do it. And now you're like, oh, well, he must need corrections now to clean up the behavior. That's not what's going on, though. The dog is really trying, but their brain is going crazy and they're struggling to recall that information. So they don't need aversives. They need to go back and build that reinforcement history with you so they can be confident in their responses. So reinforce those basics. Spend the time doing it. It may seem like you are going at a snail's pace, but come time your dog gets out of adolescence, you might realize you're 12 steps ahead of other people who you thought were ahead of you. And it's not a race. You don't need to compare yourself to anybody, but you may come to realize that all the time you spent on those basic foundation behaviors paid off 10 times what you thought it was going to. So that's really important. Go back to basics, please. I and your adolescent dog, we are begging you to go back to those basics and spend the time. Build the relationship, build the reinforcement history. You will not regret it. You will never regret going back to the basics.
Can we look just a minute? And I like how you said you don't need to compare yourself. And I totally agree with you. Unfortunately, that's human nature, of course. And so we like to. So what I try to remind people is, just like your puppy may have been great last week and they're different this week, that snippet that we see on somebody's social media is them having a really good week. Doesn't show what their last week was like or what their next week is going to be like. So we need to remember that those snippets that we tend to automatically just compare ourselves to, it's not reality. It's true for that moment, for that environment, for that day. And as we know, adolescents change. I have a client right now whose adolescent she's been doing a lot of training in, say, gas station bathrooms, because they do a lot of time in the car, and she'll run in and use the bathroom. And she's got a dog she's training to be a mobility dog, so he'll go in with her. And now all of a sudden at like 10 months old, he no longer wants to go into the bathroom. And I mean, I totally understand why. And she will work him through it. But the very first thing, and I know you're going to get to this later, but right now he just needs a break and needs to not be going into bathrooms for a while. And so we have to kind of think about that when we really are setting ourselves up to compare to somebody else or another dog that maybe is the same age. Maybe it's even a friend who's training a dog that we work with all the time. We have to remember that it's not linear. And when we compare ourselves in a linear line, we hurt our image. And so I see a lot of people considering career changing or washing or whatever term you want, taking a dog out of service dog training during adolescence simply because they get stuck in comparing them to other dogs. So that's a big one. That's for me. If you're going to compare yourself, at least also remember that they have bad days too, and bad weeks, and sometimes bad months. And especially when it comes to leash manners. I can very, very easily get a 4.5-month-old puppy to walk at heel for a really long time. But that same 8-month-old puppy, now when the environment is so much more exciting, really, really struggles. So you're going to make progress with leash manners, and then you're going to back up again. And you're going to make progress, and then you're going to back up again. And it's going to go back and forth a lot. So that's my biggest thing. Every time you go back to basics, remember it's a phase. If you keep going back to basics, eventually your dog will get past it. If you do nothing and stop training altogether, your dog may not get past it. But if you give them the break to develop and then go back into it, you can help yourself a lot. Which is kind of where I created what I call my go nowhere walks, which is, there's a lot of trainers that have different names, sniffabouts, freedom walks. It's basically a long line walk, but my particular version for adolescents is you pick a place out in the middle of nowhere where distractions are at a minimum, and you sit down and let your dog sniff. They can watch, they can check, they can do what they want. Eventually, every dog gets tired of engaging in the environment and comes back to their person. They're not free roaming. They're on a line. They can only go a certain amount of distance away from you. You're supervising, but you're letting them have their time to be a dog. and then you do your training session. And that has helped me more with preventing bad habits during leash manners than all of the training I've done to try to teach the dog the right kind of leash manners. Preventing the bad habits is a bigger part of the battle. You know, the dog can't pull on you. If you walk up, I like to back up my vehicle to a field and then clip right to my car. So then my dog has the whole field to explore, but is attached to my car, leash isn't in my hands. I couldn't give him a correction if I tried. And I can just sit there and be, and you can enjoy a little bit of nature. I used to do Zooms this way once upon a time when Azul was little. I did many a Zooms out of the back of my car with him just chilling in the environment around me. And that kind of go nowhere walk can do amazing things for your leash skills that all adolescents struggle with. So just want to remind people, just like you said, don't be afraid to go back, and know that you're going to go back multiple times, and you will get through it if you are consistent. Take your breaks, but then when you're training, be consistent to what you were doing, how you trained at the time before, or slightly improved from how you trained at the time before, because hopefully we all continue learning as well.
Ariel brought up a good point a little bit ago about adolescents not necessarily being a hard and fast number. And it's important to keep that in mind, that, you know, one dog may mature at 18 months, another at 2 years, or in Nick's case, I'm not sure when that's happening. But it's going to vary from dog to dog, depending on what's going on and the breed and a few other factors.
Yeah, so I don't remember if I said it on the recording or if I had only mentioned this before we started our chat, but my Golden, I swear, she was in her puppy phase until she was about 14 months, 15 months old. And that is when I swear adolescence hit her. She was much older than I was expecting. And so now she's 2.5, and we're still dealing with some adolescent type behavior. And I have to keep reminding myself it's not her age, it's her maturity level. That is where her brain is. There's nothing either one of us can do about it. We just have to train through it. And it is what it is. Retrievers are notorious for those longer adolescent periods and needing more time to mature. I mean, I think they say typically retrievers don't mature until like 3. And she's probably on that track, I'd say. So it hit her a lot earlier, or a lot later, I'm sorry, than most dogs. And that is what it is. She's an individual just like me.
I totally agree with you on that. Totally. And I mean, I have an adolescent very close to the same age right now. And sometimes she's spot on and sometimes she's not. And so it's hard for us to remember, you know, they look like an adult. They in many ways act like an adult, and then all of a sudden they're not. So let's look at the next thing that all adolescents need, which is sleep. Again, that's a big one that I see a lot of people missing because they want to have their dog go for 4 to 6 to 8 hours as a young dog. And when is that dog getting a break to actually just relax and sleep? So go ahead. I'll let you talk about that.
So I feel like the sleep issue is becoming more of a common talk about puppies, but I think it's being missed amongst adolescent stage. I think a lot of people know that puppies need a lot of sleep. They may not know how much sleep, which falls around 18 to 21 hours a day. But adolescents need plenty of sleep too. I mean, you think about human teenagers and they sleep a lot. In fact, that's when parents are always saying, are you going to do anything besides sleep? Well, their brains and bodies are developing, and that takes a lot of energy. So they need more sleep. Dogs are not any different in that aspect. So they need a lot of sleep. They may not need as much as 18 to 21 hours, but they still need plenty of sleep. And if you are taking them out and doing a lot of training, whether that's sports training or service dog training or whatever, you need to give them even more rest because you are doing a lot more. You are doing harder activities with them, whether it's more physically demanding or mentally demanding. They're going to need that much more rest. And because this isn't talked about often, I think a lot of times people are saying, oh my gosh, my dog is just awful. Like, I know the adolescent stage, but this is just horrendous. A lot of times the dog needs more sleep. And then when they get that rest, they're like, oh, different dog. I'm a different person when I haven't had enough sleep. You ask my fiance and he will tell you I'm not fun when I don't sleep. So we have to remember to give them rest and consider how long you are working them in a day. Again, it doesn't matter what activity it is. It could be agility. It could be like obedience, competition obedience. It could be service dog training or like nose work training, whatever. How long are they being worked in a day? And how much time are they getting to rest during that time? It all needs to be taken into account. If they are doing higher engaging activities, they may need help to settle, just like puppies. Sometimes puppies need help settling to go to sleep. A lot of times I call it going land shark, and they're just going crazy and they're getting bitey and zoomy, and they need help to settle to go to sleep. Sometimes human babies are like that. Sometimes adolescent dogs need help to settle too. And so, we can help them by giving them a calm environment, a calming activity to do, like maybe a Kong or something, to help them settle and then go to sleep. We just want to make sure they are getting enough rest because you will not have a good training time with them if they are not getting adequate rest.
I know that's a huge one for me. And I can tell, like, whenever Roz, my adolescent, starts to struggle, no matter what time of day it is, if she's struggling, if she can't pay attention, if she can't focus, she has one of two needs. She needs to go potty or she needs a nap. And most generally it's a needs a nap, but she likes to also wait and wait and wait to go potty. So like she will wait as long as she possibly can, and then she's got to go right now. But and she's really good at it, thankfully. And I try to get her out before she actually tells me she needs to go. It's the sleep that I tend to miss because we have busy lives. And I forget to think, all right, when was her last nap? Until all of a sudden she's unable to focus. And I'm like, oh wait, when was her last nap? All right, Rosie, nap time. And she does really good with, once she actually calms down, but it's that intermediary between let's go play with friends to, all right, let's relax. That's where she struggles the most. And that's where the so-called naughty behaviors, whatever, your naughty behaviors are, for her, it's usually looking for things to chew on that she shouldn't chew on, or grabbing things to bring them to me to trade because she knows she gets cookies for that. And so it's one or the other. And when she does that repetitively and she can't stop, it usually means she needs a nap.
And, it's important to plan those things into your day. This morning, I was working with a client, and then the boyfriend and I went to go look at some wood to make a dog cart. And so we went to several different lumber stores, and we were deciding what to do after the last one. And I said, well, Nick needs to take a nap. because we have class tonight where he has to be focused on the class and I have to be focused on the class. So we came home and now he's taking his nap. So it's important to build those in if you know you're going to have, if you know you've got something going on later in the day.
Totally agree. And so another huge thing that I see is after you've given sleep, there's a huge kind of training philosophy going on. In dog training terms, it's often called nothing in life is free, where you're hand feeding every single morsel your dog is eating based on a job they're doing. Definitely flaws with that, and I don't really want to go into that in great detail because that would be like 3 more other chats. But the whole thought of people then also take the other extreme of like, I've given you treats for sit long enough. I'm not going to treat you when you sit anymore. And then all of a sudden, a high distracting environment. The dog sees a whole pack of geese walking by and they've never seen geese before. So excitement level, and now the dog can't sit. That rate of reinforcement is super, super important for adolescents. So I think kind of going over that and reminding people why, when we go back to basics, we often have to up our rate of reinforcement.
Yeah, rate of reinforcement is super important with young dogs. And I personally just don't understand this demand to stop rewarding our dogs. If your job stopped paying you, you probably wouldn't go back. There needs to be something in it for you. And your dog is really no different. I do understand people who don't want to have to reinforce every repetition of a behavior. We do want to be able to have them do more complex behaviors or more numbers of repetitions before like a primary reinforcer like food comes out. However, when your dog is in adolescence, this goes right back into going back to basics. They need the higher reinforcement. They need that help. Their brain is developing right now. So their impulse control is like non-existent right now. And when they're trying to focus on you and they're in these distracting environments, that lack of impulse control makes it harder for them to choose you over the distractions. With my golden, there were literally times that I could see she was just really distracted. All I did was reinforce her for checking in with me. We stood still amongst distractions and I just waited. She was allowed to look. She was allowed to sniff with the length of leash that she had. It wasn't quite a go nowhere walk, but we could go to a pet store, stand around, and I'm like, do what you do. Do what you do. There's no corrections. I don't use corrections. I'm just going to let you do what you want to do. When you do things I like, I'm going to reinforce it, but nothing happens if you're sniffing or you're watching another dog or you're watching this human grab dog food off a shelf or you're listening to these 2 other dogs bark at each other. I'll just let you do what you want to do. And then when you decide to engage with me, I'm going to reward the crap out of it. You're going to think you won the lottery. I want you to choose me, but I'm aware of the fact that you may not be capable of that right now. So I'm going to drop my expectations and I'm just going to reward you for choosing me. That's it. That's all we're doing here. And it was a lot of rewards, higher value rewards. I will use kibble as a reinforcer. In my house, my dogs are totally fine with getting kibble for rewards. When we go out, I try to give them something that makes it worth their time. Now, as time goes on, I may drop the value of the reward as they're progressing. But with an adolescent, that's kind of hard to do with all of the competing factors, such as distractions and brain chemistry, I want them to choose to focus on me. And if the job is hard, I'm going to pay better. You know, you have to pay a competitive salary.
I think when we're talking rate of reinforcement, we also have to start to look at additional reinforcements beyond food. Well, yes, food is a primary reinforcement for many, many dogs. I mean, all dogs need to eat, right? I'm not one to like withhold my dog's food if they don't want to engage with me that day. So my dog is going to get as much food as he wants. So I have a dog that's not going to overeat. He can have as much kibble as he wants any time of day and ask for it anytime he wants, and it's free. The good stuff, like you said, the higher rate of reinforcement usually comes when we're not home. And it is usually for simple stuff. But then I'm also going to use things like going to sniff the tree because he loves to sniff his P-mail and do his male marking. And since he loves to do that, I'm going to use those two things as motivation. You know, don't drag me down the trail and you can sniff and mark all you want. Start dragging me and we're going to go into a training session, or we're going to stop moving, or we're not going to allow the drag, but we're going to reinforce with anything in that environment outside of food. For one, Azul just isn't going to take a food outside. He doesn't like food enough to take food outside. But when we look at those other reinforcers, that actually allows us to maintain a really high rate of reinforcement without having, a whole buffet in our pocket. I never step out the door without treats, but I have less treats, and I would rather have less of a higher value food reward on me than a whole ton of a lower value. I've gotten really good at using alternative reinforcements, such as one of my favorite things for adolescents is we all know in the service dog world that we step out into public and we're going to have at least a couple people go, look at that puppy, or oh, there's a dog, or oh, whatever, some kind of comment, right? Well, Azul heard the 3 keywords quite frequently: beautiful, handsome, gorgeous. So we set those up in training sessions, first with family and branched out to some friends. But anytime those words were heard or said, that meant first I was going to get excited. So I'm going to match whatever energy level the other person has. Second, we're going to go into one of his favorite games, which is a simple moving hand target game where that hand target moves around my body. And third, we're going to go to a low distraction environment where he's going to get that high rate of reinforcement for focusing on me. So I'm putting in the motivation for focusing on me by me being the most exciting thing in the room. And yes, there were a couple of times I made a scene of myself being the most exciting thing in the room. But in the end, I have an adolescent that when he hears somebody say the words beautiful and handsome, he's not an adolescent anymore. But when he hears those words, because we still hear them all the time, he then instantly steps a little bit closer to me in his heel, and his focus instantly gets a little bit tighter on me because he knows he's going to get reinforced for that in some way, shape, or form, which might be that we're going to take time to go ahead and greet people when we go out of the store because he loves that. That might mean we're going to go home and play with his flirt pole. That might mean, we've built in that delayed reinforcement that if you focus on me now, you're going to get something really, really good when we're done with this session out in public. And so I really, really encourage people when you're looking at reinforcement to look at those functional reinforcers, that whatever the dog is trying to get by doing the behavior, and then you may not be able to apply that behavior in that exact moment, but use that behavior, learn from what your dog wants the most, and use that to reinforce, to train the skills you want the most, such as the tighter focus.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I don't subscribe to nothing in life is free. My dogs do enough for me that they have far, far beyond earned everything they could possibly need. Um, and my dogs are service dogs. I have one that's retired and one that's currently working. But even if they weren't working service dogs, my dog will bark when someone comes to the door. And that tells people who shouldn't be there, they don't want to come in. That's helpful. They remind me of the time of day, especially when they want something to eat. That helps me kind of keep a schedule. They provide me companionship. My dogs are already doing things for me. They don't need to earn their meals. Now, I also have retrievers, or as I like to call them, bottomless pits. So there is no danger of, oh, they're going to eat too much unless they get into an open food container, which we are very strict about closing food containers in this house for a reason. They're not going to be too full. So I will feed them their meals. Now, if I know that one of them is going to be out for a while and getting a very high rate of reinforcement with something, I might cut back slightly on one of their meals just to make sure that I'm not making them gain weight. Like, I don't want them overweight. But I am not going to withhold food because, oh, I want you focused on me. What? No, I'm not doing that. And I also will use other types of, like, my dogs love to hear go sniff. Oh my goodness. If you could see, the tail starts going in a circle. They love that. So maybe I'm in a pet store and I'm practicing precision healing for Rally, and we just have a good couple steps. When I stop, instead of food being delivered to them, I might say, "Go sniff," and they will just run up and down the aisle sniffing where every other dog in the universe has peed. And they love that. And I'll give them a few minutes and then they re-engage and we'll do it again. Maybe we'll go to a different aisle so there's something different to sniff. So those functional rewards are awesome. They are so helpful. It does not have to be food. I bring up food just because it's easy for people to throw in their pocket. You know, it's easy to deliver for reinforcement. And it's also very easy to find something usually that is high value food wise. Now, some dogs just don't care about food at all. But for your food driven dogs, you find something that they just love food wise. And for those tough situations, you can reward the crap out of whatever they have overcome to do for you. Maybe it's a recall. Maybe it's engaging you amongst all of the barking dogs that are around you. Maybe they love people. And so they're in a crowd of people and they're choosing to remain with you and focus on you instead of people. That's a huge deal. So you absolutely find something they like. I usually recommend food, but if there's other things that they prefer, use it if you can. If they like peeing on things, you probably don't want to do that when you're in a store somewhere. But if they want to sniff a shelf and it's an acceptable time for that, let them do that. If somebody wants to say hi and it's an acceptable time, let them say hi. Like, we can absolutely use things in life that they just love.
I take a lot of flack for that one in dog training and service dog communities, is the fact that I actually encourage my boy to mark, but he also has very, very good cues for go ahead, go potty, go sniff, both cues that means he can pee all he wants. And he also has a very good cue of nope, not there. Because, I mean, indoors, of course, he doesn't have a problem in any way, and I don't have to tell him, nope, not there. I did when he was an adolescent, and we were in a pet-friendly store, and we would walk past a pool that had pee on it. There, I needed the cue. But now, even if he smells pee in a store, like he points it out when we go to the dog store, he'll want to and lead me to the right aisle, look down, and like, right there, Mom. And then he wants to walk up to a staff person and tell them and have that staff person follow him back to the pee. So, but would he go there? No, because we've practiced the not there cue. He knows he doesn't have to cover it up, and he knows it doesn't belong in that environment. So he tattles. And then being able to use that as a reinforcer when we do a lot of walking out in nature. And that is one of his ultimate reinforcements, is just giving him that 10 minutes to, all right, go crazy. I don't care if we stop every foot, mark all you want, it's your time. And that's a big release for him. He totally loves it.
Penny, fortunately, the Nothing in Life is Free is at least 20 years old, and it's going out of favor.
Yeah.
I withhold a lot of food for Nick in the morning, early in the day, because I know I'm going to be using it throughout the day. And so basically I take essentially his allotment of food, and he's a very fussy eater, and I'll have, I know how much he gets, and then so I'll measure out a portion of what he what we'll use for the day, and whatever is left over he gets at night. And it's usually either in a slow feeder or some sort of enrichment toy. And he lays in his bed and eats it. Poe, I have to watch her because she eats faster.
I don't mind when people like spread the kibble out. It's just the whole philosophy of needing to earn each and every bite. That's where it gets me. Kathy Sidoho, I think it was, wrote the book Plenty in Life is Free. And so she talks a lot about those functional reinforcers.
And I think it's important that people try and figure out what their functional reinforcers are. Nick, it loves play. He's not a big foodie, and he's depends on the day whether he's a people person. This morning he wasn't. And you have to watch your dog and be able to read your dog before you can just say, oh, okay, I'm going to give my dog this for
I know
reinforcement.
Ashlyn's sorry, I thought you were done. I know Ashlyn's service dog in training is very toy motivated as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to use those toys, and we may not want to always carry around a big tug rope or whatever at the store. When Azul was in his tug stage, I made a simple little paracord. It was all of 6 inches long. And it was more of like a promise to tug later kind of thing. And that's how we built in that delayed reinforcement, is when I needed to remind him, it's like, all right, here's this mini little tug. And I could clip it to my belt loop, and he would just tug on it a little bit, kind of like the bring so. But it didn't have a purpose or an alert to it for us. It was just a reinforcement in that promise of, yeah, we're going to really tug when we get home. And out come the fun tug toys, and we're going to play the way you want to play. And it was just kind of that reminder. So I do believe that Plenty in Life is free. We just need to figure out what our dogs love that we can provide them for free.
Exactly.
So kind of moving on, and I see this a lot of times. We know we all hear the complaint. They're almost connected, but my dog just won't take any reinforcement in this environment, which can be multiple reasons. Maybe our value just isn't high enough. B, the distractions are too high, or our dog isn't prepared or able to handle that environment on that day. But another big one in that time frame is sometimes our dogs just need time off. And this goes beyond like just taking a nap in between a couple of things. It's sometimes as their brain is doing its thing and doing their rewiring, sometimes we just need to take a break. And so I know that's something you kind of wanted to talk about, Ariel. Do you want to kind of pick it up from there?
Yeah, so us humans will often take what we call a mental health day. I need this for my sanity. Okay, that's valid. Your dog needs that too. There are times where your dog may just not want to work. Or maybe they want to work, but they're not very focused on it. And so they're struggling, and it leads to frustration for them. It leads to frustration for you. So I call it give them PTO, the paid time off. They still need their meals. They still need enrichment. They still need exercise. So don't withhold any of that from them because they're getting time off. Give them the things that they need. Maybe you feed a little less because maybe you're not doing 2 agility classes in a day. So you don't want to overfeed them when they're not going to burn off the calories. Okay. But don't withhold to make them hungry because they didn't work. Plenty in life is free. So we want to make sure that they're getting what they need. If you work them past a point where they need time off, you might risk burnout. And that could be agility, that could be rally or obedience, that could be scent work, that could be service dog work, it could be therapy dog work, it could be any number of things. But you may burn them out on whatever that is if you try to push them past that point. People will quit jobs because they reach a point of burnout with it. You don't want your dog to quit. If it's something they like doing and it's something you enjoy doing with them, give them the time off to prevent them from wanting to not do it anymore. The Donna Hill said this, or at least that's where I first heard it. I don't know if she said it originally, but your dog is a dog first, a family member second, and if you have a service dog last, or an agility dog, or an obedience dog, or whatever, insert activity. Dog, family member, and then whatever activity they are doing. If they are not having their biological needs met, then you're going to struggle with them in the family, and they are certainly not going to be working with you on that activity. You have to meet their biological needs. Then we meet their, I guess you could say, social needs. And then we look at how we can help them with that activity. Time off is a biological need. If they don't get it, they're going to burn out. We've got to give them time off. And it may be a day. It could be a week. It could be longer than that. But if they need time off, make sure they get it.
Sorry, I was just looking at a chat message as well. And so, yeah, a lot of times I think with adolescents, sometimes they need more than that day off. They might need a week off. They might need 2 weeks off, especially if we're trying to do public access training during that time. Even if we're doing pet-friendly places, they may, especially when they're doing a brain change, which is what I advised my client that has the dog that doesn't want to go in the bathrooms anymore. As you know, she's done it mainly his whole life, and now all of a sudden as an adolescent, bathrooms are a little bit scary. He needs some time off. He needs some time to relax and not have to have that thrown on him. And maybe it'll be a couple of weeks. And then when we do bathrooms again, we're going to train them like we started back at the beginning. The slow desensitization, first walking in, walking back out without the door ever closing. Slowly exposure to dryers again, and the paper towel dispensers, and everything about the bathroom, exposing to the bathroom at home, and exposing to various different types of bathrooms. You know, the single, like family style bathroom that's one big handicapped stall versus the bathrooms with multiple stalls. And so if we take that break, we can often find that, you know, taking that 2 weeks to not work on that thing that the dog is really struggling with, to let them have that time away from it, is where we prevent that frustration, but it's also where we prevent the bad habits from popping in. You know, our dog, if we're forcing our dog to do behaviors that they're not able to do at that time frame, and I don't mean physically forcing, because obviously I don't physically force my dogs to do anything. But maybe we're bribing them with food of a high rate, even though we know they don't want to do it. You know, that can do just as much damage and allow those other behaviors to set in. And so kind of one example, and this is a really silly one that most people would have missed, and I missed it at first. But so Azul at a certain point was struggling walking into not necessarily new environments he had been in multiple times, but they were new to that day. So the first time in an environment. And I didn't catch what he was doing, but he was going into like a stretch bow position every time we walked in. And that's because he was struggling with processing environments, and he needed a little bit of a break from, you know, those environments. And we only went into new environments when we had the time to just pause in that doorway and let him explore the environment till his heart's content. He didn't need to totally back off in training. He just needed more processing time. He needed more sniff time outside before we went in. He needed time to just stop and stand and look around and smell the environment we were in before we actively tried to engage with anything that we would do in that environment. And so we have to look at that. The time off might just be a few extra minutes of downtime. It might be a day. It might be 2 weeks. And so we kind of have to fit that according to the signs that our dogs are showing us and what they need. And so I have a quick question. We know we've been doing this in our segments. We could kind of go through the public access stuff as it all ties in, or we could put that off for another one.
I need to get going, but you don't need me to continue.
What do you think, Ariel? You want to come back or you want to go through it now?
There's just so much to cover for public access.
There is. So let's do this. We'll do a little bit of quick public access tips for adolescents. And then we'll put the larger portion of public access off and hopefully revisit it like early in 2024. I had to stop to think what year it is. So like January or February, we will do another chat based on public access. Sound good? All right. So couple of tips with public access for me, like my big one I was already just talking about, and that's why I'm going to jump in and give it, is that environmental processing. As adolescents, processing everything that's going on, we think as humans, when we walk into an environment, the very first thing we do is we look around with our eyes. So maybe then we might rely on some of our other senses, especially if we're walking into, say, a bakery. You know, we're using our nose a little bit. We might be using our ears a little bit. If we're walking into, say, a school that might have loud children, we might be listening around corners and stuff. But primarily, we use our eyes. And dogs will primarily use their nose. Yet in the service dog industry, there's such a big push to not let dogs sniff items and the floor and stuff like that, that I think we sometimes set them up for failure at the adolescent stage where they need to process the environment. So I think if people just slowed that down, it would greatly help in their public access training. Anytime you're in a brand new store that your dog has never been in, or anytime you haven't been there for a while, especially if the store is perhaps a thrift store where there's so many more scents in a thrift store, or even a pet store, allow your dog that time, maybe not to sniff items on the shelf, but allow them to sniff the mat walking in the store, where they can at least smell the people that have been there and maybe other dogs that had walked through and different things like that. Let them sniff areas that are safe to sniff. If there's a pallet that's all packed up and they're just smelling the pallet underneath. The amount of mice my dog has pointed out that have been under a pallet in stores is crazy. I have a mice phobia, so he's trained to point out mice. But so, I mean, that kind of thing, if you're in a place where sniffing is okay and you have an adolescent, allow them that time because it will greatly improve their comfort level in that environment. So whether you want to expand on that, Ariel, or go on to a different tip, you want to talk about a public access tip for adolescents for you?
So my public access tip is, so many people consider this controversial and I don't understand why, is stop doing public access with these really young dogs. Like, give them some time to not just mature, but to really get those foundation skills under their belt. You can do so much good training in pet-friendly environments that you don't need to be taking a 6 or 7 month old dog puppy into some of these really difficult places for them to train in. Spend your time in pet-friendly places training the basics. Hold off on public access. It is by far, like by a landslide, it is the hardest phase for you and your dog. Hold off on it. Get through some of the parts of adolescence. I'm not saying you have to wait until your dog is like 2 years old to do public access, but give them some time during this adolescent phase to cope with all of the chemical changes in their brain, to cope with the fact that their body is going through changes as well, and to really narrow down or hammer down those foundation skills, those basic level skills. You will not regret it. So it again goes back to slow is fast. You will never regret holding off on public access a little longer to focus on your foundation skills, your engagement, your leash walking, your impulse control, your settling. You will never regret doing that. You could regret rushing into public access. So give your adolescent dog time to not be held to those public access expectations. Let them be an adolescent, figure out what their struggles are during adolescence, and work on that before you jump into public access. It is not a race. We're not comparing ourselves to other teams. You're not comparing your dog to your last dog. You're not comparing your dog to a program dog. It's not a race. Wait longer than you think you need to start public access. You won't regret it. I promise you, you will not regret it.
That's kind of something that is highly debatable. Like, not what you said. I totally agree with everything you said. So the term public access in itself can be a debatable term, because when I'm doing public access training, I'm doing that in pet-friendly environments. So for me, and I know a lot of people define it as when you step out of non-pet friendly environments. So it's kind of deciding where your definition is, what you determine as public access. But I stopped doing pet stores with an adolescent because they really struggle, like the pet stores, not pet friendly, but your big chain box pet stores, because they struggle so much with impulse control and bad habits sneak in those environments. I wait till my dog can handle it better, and then we go back into it. But instead, I look for, like you said earlier, those farm stores, those hardware stores, where you can replicate public access without so much worry about mistakes happening in there. And so that's where I might start it a little bit earlier. But even when I'm starting it earlier, I'm still focusing on pet-friendly places. But it's just kind of important to look at like what is in your area and what you have access to and where you're going to be comfortable at. It's kind of that catch of like, I probably, if it wasn't for dogs and training dogs, I would step in a hardware store maybe 2 to 3 times a year. So since all of my hardware stores in my local community, and I have a lot of them, they're all pet friendly. And now they all know me and they all know my dogs and they know most of my clients' dogs. Because if mistakes are going to happen in stores, I want it to happen there. Because those are environments that I don't need my dog to be on top. And since dogs don't necessarily generalize, if they make a mistake in that hardware store, that mistake is not going to necessarily carry over to other stores unless they repeat it multiple times. So if we can, like Ariel said, if we can figure out where they're struggling and work on that specific thing without allowing those bad habits to actually develop into habits, then we can really save ourselves a lot of frustration, a lot of wasted time. So on the same page, stick with pet friendly as much as possible throughout most of adolescence until you see your dog. So as we're defining public access, do you want to add anything to that, or can I go over to one more definition?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so the next definition is, we talked about how the adolescent stage varies from dog to dog. So there's a lot of difference of when do you define the adolescent stage as over for your dog. And that kind of slides into, when do you define the dog is no longer in training and a full service dog? They have very much the same criteria to me, just slightly twisted. So for me, the adolescent stage is going away when I see some self-regulation that's not just fleeting here 1 minute, gone the next, but that self-regulation exists in all of my normal environments. So yeah, they're dogs. Something could happen. A dog could pop around the corner and surprise them, and they might get extra excited, that kind of thing. But that's kind of like, that's an unexpected thing. I do try to train for that because we know it's all going to happen at some point in time. But little things like that. So there could be things like that that pop up, but I want my dog to be able to control themselves in at least 90 to 95% of the environments we're going to go in on a regular basis before I consider them out of adolescence. Granted, some dogs really never learn that if we haven't put in the work to teach them. So that may be a losing battle. But you can kind of see, if you have a teenager, if you have an adolescent dog, you go through this on a daily basis of, yeah, their focus is spot on right now, to, oh no, their focus is bad. And so we can kind of judge that. And I want to see that scale start to slide where that focus is bad level is getting smaller and smaller and smaller to almost non-existent before I say they are out of adolescence. Do you have a different definition or something else that you want to add to that?
So with my program, my service dog training program, I have my teams work through earning I call it their associate's degree, their bachelor's degree, their master's degree, and their PhD. And so the associate's degree is, we're working on the pet dog ambassador titles. I just prefer that over canine good citizen. It's more real life. So we're working on the pet dog ambassador titles. We're learning paw targets. We're learning nose targets. We're starting the basics of whatever tasks they're going to learn. So, for a dog that's going to learn deep pressure therapy, it would be laying down in close proximity to the person's body. For scent work, we're working on pairing the scent with rewards, things like that. Then they'll earn their associate's degree. Then their bachelor's degree, we're working on the upper levels of pet dog ambassador, and we're training in public, but we're not. So I define public access as not pet friendly. So we're not doing public access yet, but we are working out in public, and I want to see them have 2 tasks performed at 80% accuracy for 2 consecutive months. And I do require that we pick 3 tasks that the dog is going to be trained to help them with. So it's just 2 of the 3. It doesn't need to be all of them. That's when they earn their bachelor's. Their master's degree is the public access training phase. And once they enter that phase, I require a minimum of 100 logged hours of public access. And I have limits on how much time they can do per day and within 7 days. So it starts off with you can't work more than like 2 hours at a time, and you can't do that more than twice in a 7 day period. And then as they're doing well, I'll say, okay, you can work a little more. You can do 3 days in a 7 day period, and so on. But we've got to meet that 100 hours. Once that 100 hours is met, then we start looking at task accuracy during public access. And I tell them I'll include pet friendly places. They need to be able to task in pet friendly locations as well. But now we need to have accuracy in public with their tasks, not just their foundation skills, but with their tasks as well. And once they can demonstrate that, then we start looking at the PhD, which is my graduation phase. So it sounds like we only do 100 hours, but that is just the public access training phase. And all that is training in places that are not pet friendly. They have hundreds of hours, and I screen each team individually. If I see that they've met the 100 hours, but we've got some holes, okay, we're not moving out of this phase yet. We've got some more work to do. And I'm very communicative with my teams about that. It's never a surprise that, hey, I think we need to spend a little bit more time on this or that. They'll always say, completely agree. How do we proceed? And we do that. So there's maturity, there's task accuracy, there's training in public before I'll even consider moving them into the graduation phase. And all of those things are super individual for each team. So my criteria, I guess, isn't black and white.
And that's a really good point, because it's not always black and white. And that I'm kind of the same with you. I don't require them to turn in training hour logs, although I love it. And I do have a couple of log formats that I usually share with people, so I suggest it. But usually I'm going to have been on multiple outings with them, and I'm going to know their dog well enough to know the different days. So you can see different things. But for me, that graduation to full service dog is when you can go out and do whatever it is you have on your agenda that day. Yes, you're taking care of your dog's needs along the way, but you shouldn't be 100% focused on your dog. You should be able to do a grocery shopping trip where, yes, maybe you might focus on your dog because you saw another dog a little ways, or you might have to give your dog a specific cue. But for the most part, your dog knows what to do, and you trust your dog to do it without a whole lot of guidance. That's when I like to see the in-training patches come off. And so usually that means sometimes a dog is closer to 3 years old, sometimes older, depending on when you started. But, it's not a rush. That's when it's at a point to where you could pretty much take this dog into any environment and be successful, because you've put in the time in so many different environments that your dog now they just roll with it, and they're happy to be there. That's a big one that I really look at for all my clients. If I see a dog that's not happy to be there, that means we're going way too fast and we need to slow things down. So we want happy. If they're not happy to be there, if they're not happy to do their job, their accuracy in tasks is going to go down. And so if we can keep them happy and wanting to be there, and they have that accuracy, and we are needing to focus on them less and less and less, almost not existent. I remember Azul was maybe just under 2 years old, just over 2 years old. But I remember one day thinking in the store, while we were in the store, oh my gosh, where's my dog? And looking down, and he was just in the perfect heel and been in the perfect heel for so long that I basically forgot he was there, and kind of that light bulb moment. So when I'm in public, most of the time I'm working on a hands-free leash, either a shoulder strap leash or connected to my waist belt. I usually use something that's just shy of 2 foot long. So there may not be in a perfect heel, but as long as that leash is not taut, I really don't care where my dog is. It allows them to stretch over to the other side if I need them to switch sides, and that's all the length it gives them. So they could do a partial circle around me, but not a full circle around me. And they can be where they need to be. And so that's what we were walking like that, on a short leash attached to my waist. And I know some people say, well, when you're using the hands-free or the strap that you feel less movement, but I feel everything. If he stops, if he looks the other way, if he loses focus even briefly, I feel it. And so that moment of where we had gone like 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm like, crap, do I have a dog with me still? And he was perfectly right where he was supposed to be and with me. That light bulb moment. That's the perfect kind of thing of when we want to go from in training to a full service dog. When we have that feeling the majority of the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. You should not have to be focusing so hard on your dog that you're mainly doing a training session while you might also do 1 or 2 other things while you're doing it. It needs to be your ability to focus on what you're doing with maybe giving your dog some assistance. Hopefully most of the assistance is your dog to you.
Right. And it's a really fine line for people. Like I deal a lot with people that struggle with service dogs as whether it's ethical to use service dogs or not. And that's kind of that line of, we've already talked about your dog should be happy to be there. But when we say the statement that we want to not pay attention to our dogs, we don't want any focus on them, that doesn't mean we're not meeting their needs. That doesn't mean that we're not aware of, hey, they need a break to lay down, or hey, they're overheating, or hey, they need some water. We're still paying attention to those needs, because that's what we would do if we had a child or even an adult friend. When my husband's with me, and paying attention to what does he need? Does this need to be his last store for the day? And so we're always going to be paying attention to those things, but we don't need to want to have to pay attention to, do they know where to stand when we stop and pause? Do they know that we can walk past this person without trying to interact with that person? Can we walk through the meat section without having to remind them not to sniff the meat? Those little things. That's what I mean by not paying attention to your dog. Anything else? One last tip, or shall we save the rest for the chat we will do next year?
I say let's save it.
All right. We covered an awful lot, and I know we do. I just want to say one last thing, because it's my group and I can. So adolescence is probably one of the most frustrating times for all dog owners. Pet dog, sport dog, service dog in training, no matter what. Adolescence is one of the most challenging times. So I created a Facebook group specifically for that. And there's some occasional good training tidbits in that group. But the reason behind designing the group was to give places for people a safe place for people to vent if they need to. If your dog is just having an awful, awful day, maybe they barked at the doctor who knocked on the door before coming in and it totally embarrassed you, and you need to tell that to get it out of your system, it's a good group to do it in. It's a small group of 20 or so less people at a time, because people come and go when their dog leaves adolescence. So I think I've had it up to like 45 people at one time. But safe place to vent, to ask for training help, to talk to other dog owners that are in the same place without comparing, is your dog doing better than my dog, kind of thing. So anybody who wants into that group, I'll put a link to that in the notes for this chat, just in case, if you're really struggling with your adolescent, then I suggest you join the group just for that safe place. And with that, we will say good night, everybody. Have a good evening.